All right. So good evening once again to all of you all. So let's quickly start off with the session. So, I mean, the topic of the session is self-explanatory, how to push your quant score beyond the 47. So if you're, a person who's in the middle of your prep or in the fag end of your prep, then this session would make more sense, especially people for, in the last phase or the last month of your preparation. The points that I'm making, I think once you follow them, should be able to push your quant score by another couple of points, right? So if you're new to the GMAT and you've just come here to see how the harder levels of questions look like, then you're free to continue watching the webinar. But if you're new to the GMAT and you don't know anything about data sufficiency, then my advice would be this webinar is something that you would not have too much to gain from. All right. So before we start, there's a couple of ground rules that we need to follow. So we want to make the session as organized as possible, right? So any responses that you have or you want to have a discussion on a particular question, just wait for me to wrap up my discussion on that question. Maybe in my explanation, I cater to all modes of thought, right? And then after a question, right, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, say approximately 5 minutes, for you to put in your points of thought, or if you have any alternate processes you want me to work a question with, we can definitely do so, right? If there's any lag of around 10 seconds, quickly ping me in the chat window and quickly log out and log in. I think most of the times that should sort the issue out. All right. So the agenda of the session is approximately for 90 minutes. It may spill over by another 15-20 minutes because I'm going to keep like a question round of sorts in the last 10-15 minutes. All right. So just keep yourself free at least till around 9:15, 9:30. All right. Just a quick pieces of information about Crack Verbal, and this is for people who are not our students, people who have just come in for the webinar directly. We founded in 2006. We've catered to approximately 6,000 and odd students and students from different countries altogether, because we also handle personal tutoring. So we have students from US, Canada, even from Mozambique, so coming on board with us, right? So just a quick overview of what resources you can use online, and this is even for the students of Crack Verbal. If you don't know that you have access to all of these resources, please go and check them out. You can always and this is for people who are starting the prep or people in the middle of the prep, right? You can always click on this link that is given here, and you can go and access the entire trial videos of our online course. So what I've done is I've kept the problem solving strategies and data sufficiency strategies videos open, so it's a good set of around 4 hours of videos that you can go through. I would definitely recommend people in their first phase of prep go through those videos, because there's a lot of good content that's out there, right? You can also go through Arun's video on 5 common traps on critical reasoning. I think that's a great video that you guys will have a lot of things to gain from. Second is we have a lot of ebooks, a lot of blogs that we have published as a faculty team. I personally have published the ultimate guide to GMAT inequalities. I know that we've also created an integrated reasoning IR ebook that you can make use of, and this is for people who are looking at preparing for AW and IR. We have all those resources on our website, right? So please go ahead, scrounge around in the the archives or scrounge around in the entire resources section. You're going to definitely find out some really good ebooks, right? Ebooks based on different levels also. So you have ebooks for people starting off their prep, in the middle of their prep, and finally also for the application processes, right? Perfect. So that's the only points that I wanted to make before we start the session. So the reason why I chose to pick this topic, right, is because many of the students, this is test taking season, and many students come to me and say, I've got a 47 or a 48 on quant. What do I do to push my score to a 50, 51, right? Just one thing out there, I don't want to sound, very downbeat as such, but see, guys, 51 is on the day of the test, okay? Because if for you to get a 51, you ideally should get all questions right, or you can afford a maximum of 2 errors, right? So just make sure that if you're targeting a 51, it's always more realistic to say, okay, I may make a couple of errors on test day. I may end up with a 50. So remember, 51 is just how you perform on test day, right? Venkateshwar Rao, you're taking the GRE, not the GMAT. It may help you out, but see, most of the questions that I've chosen here is something called data sufficiency, right? So on the GRE data sufficiency, you don't have any questions of that type. So most of the questions that I discuss here may not help you out of sorts, okay? And the questions on the GMAT are slightly harder than the GRE. So you can maybe sit through the session, but I'm going to pertain myself only to GMAT, okay? All right. So like I said, right, as I've always spoken to students, many students come to me with this query, I'm stuck at a 47, 48, what do I do, right? So there's just two things that I always, ask students stuck at a 47 to do. First, there will be certain specific topics that you're continuously making errors on. For example, the topics that are problematic areas are permutations, combinations, probability. That is one. You have another problem area in terms of inequalities and absolute values, right? And some people also face some problems on number systems, but I'm just giving you like a majority, what a majority of students would, problems that majority of students face. But there would be other problem areas also. Maybe some people might find geometry to be a little more daunting than what it actually is, right? So the first thing you have to do is always, when you analyze any test, so basically when you're stuck at a 46, 47, I'm assuming you've taken up a practice test. So the first thing you have to do is try to identify patterns of, all the questions that you've answered wrong in the practice tests. And I wouldn't only analyze the questions that I've answered wrong. I would also analyze the questions that I've answered correct, but took me too much of time, right? So now another reason why students get stuck or plateau at a 47 is because they don't have a proper timing strategy, right? You end up spending too much time on a question, right? 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes, and then you end up either getting it right, but that's going to impact the other questions that follow, or you get it wrong and it's a double whammy at that case, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to give you a timing strategy of how to pace out your test, right? That will definitely help you out. That may be the difference between you getting a 47 or a 48. But remember, guys, the timing strategy, you can only improve your point by maximum of 1 point. Okay, you still have to focus on the specific topics and trying to get those topics in place. And for those who are looking at a 49 or 50, right, on the current pattern of the test, if you require a 49 or 50, you cannot afford to make more than 7 errors on the test, right? Around 6 to 7 errors is what you can afford, but you cannot afford more than 6 to 7 errors. So when you analyze your test and you see that you made around 10 to 11 errors, ideally you'll have to reduce that to a single digit form, right? See, some of the errors would be very, very silly errors. So if you ask me a question on how do I improve on, how do I basically not make the silly errors, I'll have absolutely, no answer for you, because you're the only person who can cut out those silly errors, right? Maybe you spend a little more time on a question, right? Give the question its due than what you actually did. Maybe read the question carefully. Maybe don't skip steps while working a question. Never always think about the clock, right? It's always better for you to go with the flow of the question and then look at the clock at regular intervals, right? So I'm going to give you a timing strategy which you can follow. And I'm going to give you some specific tips on how you analyze all your questions once you take a test, okay? And what I've done with this session is also I've kept a good set of questions, right? Varying degrees of difficulty. Excuse me. Some questions being harder levels of questions, some questions being, medium, easy level questions, but most of the questions where I'm going to illustrate certain traps that you will normally fall for, right? And at the end of the session, what we'll do is we'll consolidate all of these points, right? And these are the points that you'll have to make a note in your error log. and make sure that when you use, you refer to these points, especially when you analyze any practice test. Got it? So now let's come to the timing strategy first. Okay. And this is especially for people who have a problem with time, right? How many of you all here who have taken up a practice test, right, have faced an issue with time on the quant section, and you ended up guessing, maybe 4 to 5 questions in the end, or not answering 4 to 5 questions in the end? Quickly, can you type in the chat window if you're such a person? Perfect. Okay. So what do you think? And I want an answer from everybody here. 10 to 12 minutes extra than usual. Oh, that is too much, Fikar. Okay. So what is the exact reason on why you face that timing strategy? I mean, why you face that timing issue? Is there a particular reason on that? Anybody can tell me why exactly? Have you analyzed it yourself? Conceptual clarity, perfect. Too much time on some questions. Harder level questions take time, not necessarily, Prasoon. Panic, okay. Wavering thoughts, Pratyush, that's something I cannot help you out with, okay? Careless mistakes, all right. Calculation mistakes, spending too much time, perfect. So, okay, perfect. Yes, it's being recorded. It's being recorded, Sanmeet. So, I agree with you. See, the bigger problem area is is that you spend too much time, right, on a question, right? So what do you do when you spend too much time on a question? Have you analyzed why have you spent too much time on the question? Have you analyzed the question and found out what is the alternate way to solve that question? Why did you choose the entire roundabout route to get to an answer? Now, clearly this is a big issue that students face, right? You spend too much time on a question. Now, what is the ideal time that you need to take to spend on a question? Now, many people are under the assumption that, okay, you have 31 questions and you have 62 minutes. So you need to spend exactly 2 minutes per question. That is not the case. What we normally say is you need to spend an average of 2 minutes on a question. So if one question takes you a minute 30 seconds, then another question can take you 2 minutes 30 seconds, right? So guys, don't put a hard and fast rule of saying, okay, I need to get this question done in 2 minutes, then rush your way through and then make silly mistakes and end up, messing up that question. But where do you keep that cap? And on what time, or on what, say after how much time do you say, okay, I'm going to let this question go? The ideal time frame to let a question go would be when you're 3 minutes 30 seconds down. When you're in the region of 3 minutes and you're spending more time on this question, that's when you let the question go. And the best way to let a question go is to always think about what is the end result. Okay, don't think about you getting that question right or wrong. Always be aware of what the end result is. Remember, the end result is what matters more than you winning the war with that question, right? So as soon as you see that you spend 3 minutes on a question, you're not getting nowhere, skip and move on. All right. So please do not spend too much time on certain questions. It doesn't make sense. No question on the GMAT will take you 3.5 minutes to solve. I've never come across any question which takes you so much time. If you take 3.5 minutes to solve, there's something lacking in the approach of the question. But what would I do post the practice test that I take, right? I would make a note of these questions also that I've taken too much of time, and I would analyze these questions. Now, there are two ways you can analyze these questions. One, you can always go on to our forum, the Crack Verbal forum, or any GMAT Club forum, and look at the alternate ways that people have used to solve and make a note of the alternate ways, right? Always make a note of different approaches to solve a question. That's always going to help you out, right? I'll give you an example of how you would actually use alternate approaches to solve a question. I have a couple of questions with me towards the end. I will illustrate that better with questions, right? But make sure you always analyze the question. Just don't let that question go and follow the same rut of solving questions using X, Y, Z, too many variables at some points. Okay, so always try to find out what would be the best way to get to an answer. Even for people who are in the middle zone of their prep, right, who are still working your way through the quant review and the OG, I would do two things, right? If I were you, I would always do two things. One, I would always solve the question first, okay? And I would get to an answer. But I would always choose to review all the questions by looking at an explanation on the forum. Because when I review all the questions, right, I get different modes of thought, right? I get different perspectives of how to get to an answer. And knowing different perspectives will definitely help you on test day, because if you're stuck and you're rigid in your thought process and you work with only one procedure to work, guaranteed on the higher levels of questions you're not going to get to an answer. So make sure you review all the questions either on the Crackable forum or the GMAT Club forum. The GMAT Club forum is huge. You'll have a lot of different processes of working. Make a note of 2 or 3 processes which actually make sense. And second, always critically analyze the other answer choices. For every question, right? Always try to critically analyze the other answer choices. Understand why those other answer choices are put there. What exact trap has the GMAT laid for me there for me to pick answer choice alpha, beta, Charlie, or delta, leaving echo to be the answer. Try to figure out what mistake are they expecting you to make on that question to pick any one out of A, B, C, and D, provided E is the right answer. Now, this way of looking at the every question on the OG and the quant review, right, is actually going to help you illustrate what are the different traps that they lay on data sufficiency questions, especially. Okay, this critical analysis of the other answer choices will always help you on data sufficiency, right? So when you pick C and the answer is C, I will say, okay, what is the trap that, how can I change the question slightly to, make somebody fall for a trap of B or D? So make sure you do that for data sufficiency. Also make sure you do that for problem solving, because for problem solving, you have answer choices to be definite values, right? So when you have answer choices to be definite values, you can actually reverse engineer that and figure out what mistakes a test taker is, expected to make. Correct? For those who are, typing in the chat window and saying the OG is not very, very tricky. See, yes, I agree with you. The OG is not a, good resource for harder levels of questions, but think about it, right? It's the only resource of official questions. So even if the questions are not too hard, my advice would be still go through all the questions from the OG and the quant review. The questions towards the end of the OG, right, are normally of higher difficulty levels because it's arranged in ascending order of difficulty. All right. So just make sure you work your way through the OG and don't give up in the beginning or the middle saying that the questions here are too easy. Yes, definitely the questions, I would agree that are easy, but I would provide you different resources if you want. If you're stuck at a 48, 49 level, I would provide you different resources where you can think about harder levels of questions. But I only do that for people who have, in a practice test, reached a 48 or a 49 level on the quant section. So Shant, what is OG? The OG is the official guide, okay, of GMAT. So I'm guessing you're a new person to the GMAT, okay? Sauvik, again, let me put a caveat here. What the only resources I suggest is the OG, quant review, and the advanced documents that we provide, okay? If you have exhausted all of these, I'm repeating, if you have exhausted all of these, and you're at a 48 or a 49 level on the quant section, then you can make use of the advanced GMAT Quant from MGMAT. Okay, that's a very, very, very good resource. It gives you harder quant questions to work with, and it'll at least make you think a little out of the box. Okay, you can definitely make use of this. It's a very, 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 very good resource. But again, a caveat here: you only utilize this book when you're at a 48, 49. Otherwise, it will not make sense at all to you, right? For people at the 44 level, you're not even seeing the harder levels of questions. It's better for you to focus on the medium and the medium hard questions and don't go to the advanced level unless you get a 49. Okay, perfect. Now, how do you analyze the questions that you answer on the test, right? And what exactly do you take back from every question? How do you analyze the question? What do you, in a sense, say if you have a geometry question, right? How do I exactly view that question? What notes do I take when I solve the question one by one by one? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a sense of how I structured my prep, right? How would I structure my prep if I was preparing for the GMAT, right? I'll show you exactly how I would do that with a couple of questions. Okay, so I have a good set of questions here. We will work step by step by step, and I'll show you what I would add in my error log, what I would add as pointers in the in the book that I have, and what I would do on a weekly basis, right? In a cyclic fashion when I'm taking up practice tests. So what I want all of you all to do, right? First rule, remember guys, if you're at a 47 level, you have to make sure your basics of all the topics are spot on. If your basics are spot on, then only you can think about strategies, then only you can think about your quant score to be pushed to a 49. So I'm going to give you this question. I'm going to give all of you all only a minute and a half, because that's how much time you actually require for this question to solve this question. And we'll have a discussion at the end of a minute and a half. I don't want any one of you all to type the answer in the chat window until I ask you to do so. Once I ask you to do so, please type in your answers. Your time starts now. Yes, Sanmeer, I'll give you a 15-minute, I'll give you a 15-minute slot where all of you all can put in your doubts, and I'll try to address all your questions there. Okay, so you can bring this question back again in the last part of the session. No, Shikhar, I don't think it's required to upgrade to 17. Upgrade to 19 if you have the 17. Okay, approximately 80% of the content is the same. You always finish the theory first, Hambrick, before you go to questions. Okay, guys, you can start typing your answers in the chat window, please. We have almost 140 people here, so guys, I would want a lot of responses. Last 30 seconds. Okay, so clearly the question here, most of your answer choices are between, an equal split of Charlie and Echo, right? For those who answered Charlie, great job. I've started with a very easy question. You've crossed the first hurdle of sorts. For those who answered Echo, right, and this is what I mean by your basics, right? Your basics have to be spot on. You cannot fall for traps at this phase of your preparation, because you'll need to be very, 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 very careful on data sufficiencies, right? Now let's work to break this question down. A showroom has cars and trucks in the ratio 7:9. So cars, trucks, 7:9. Whenever you work a ratio question, it always makes sense to attach a variable to the ratio. A shipment containing only cars and trucks arrives. If no car and truck was sold before and after the shipment arrived, what is the new ratio of cars to trucks in the showroom? So basically, I have a shipment that contains both cars and trucks which arrives. So obviously, the number of cars is going to be added to 7x, and the number of trucks is going to be added to 9x. And the question is asking me, what is the new ratio of cars to trucks in the showroom, right? Now, the first statement tells me the number of cars that arrived in the shipment is 28. So if the number of cars that arrived in the shipment is 28, the number of cars in the showroom now would be 7x plus 28. But I still don't know how many trucks have arrived with this shipment, right? So the first statement clearly is insufficient. The second statement says the number of trucks that arrived in the shipment is 36. So don't carry your information over, please. So here I have 9x plus 36, but I have absolutely no information about the number of cars that have arrived. So out goes B. Now when I put the two statements together, now this is where you need to think a little more carefully. The number of cars that arrived in the shipment was 28, and the number of trucks that arrived in the shipment was 36. And the question asks you, what is the new ratio of cars to trucks in the showroom? Now, most of you all who gave Echo as the answer, you all just left the question hanging here and said that I need another ratio for me to solve for X and for me to figure out what is the new ratio of cars to trucks in the showroom, or I need some information about X for me to get this new ratio, right? That's not the case, because you'll always have to look at trying to answer the question. Don't let go at this point. If you look at the ratio here, the ratio of cars to trucks now after the shipment arrived would be 7x plus 28 divided by 9x plus 36, right? You can take 7 common on the numerator, that would give you x plus 4. You can take 9 common in the denominator, that would also give you x plus 4. And the x plus 4 and x plus 4 would get cancelled to give me the new ratio also in the form of 7:9. So the answer here has to be Charlie. Now, why am I saying here your basics have to be spot on? See, whenever you work with a ratio question, right, you need to sometimes play devil's advocate. Don't assume that for you to solve for a ratio, you always need to solve for the variable of that ratio. You can always solve for a ratio by putting it in terms of a fraction. And if in that fraction you're able to factor out something on the numerator, factor out something on the denominator, and eliminate eliminate the terms on the numerator and denominator, you can get a new ratio. The conceptual take back on this question is this: if you add or subtract any quantity which is also in the same ratio as the initial ratio given to you, you see the initial ratio of cars to trucks in the showroom is 7:9. The cars that I'm adding and the trucks that I'm adding are also in the ratio 7:9. 4 sevens are 28, 4 nines are 36. So if you have an initial ratio, and if you also add quantities which are also in the same initial ratio, then the final ratio will also remain the same. So now the first thing is for people who've got Echo as the answer. This is what you would take back from this question, right? So what you would definitely go and do in your error log now, or in the book that you're maintaining of all the mistakes, of all the pointers, you would go into your book and you would write down these rules on ratio, right? If you add or subtract a quantity which is also in the same ratio as the initial ratio, then the final ratio also remains the same. And you would add this as a pointer. And when you add that as a pointer, later on, as you proceed further and you add more pointers to that book, before taking up a practice test, you can always glance at all the points that you've made. And remember, you will be aware of the traps that they lay on a question. Got it? So for those who gave echo as the answer here, this is what you'll need to take back. Got it? Okay, with this, guys. Into why the truck ratio is not y, I will not use a different variable y and make my life harder, right? Why should I make my life harder? Take 7x and 9y. It's a ratio, no? So if that ratio 7x is to 9, 7x and 9y, then you're telling me that x and y are different factors. That doesn't make sense in a ratio, right? You don't use 7x and 9y. Why would I make it harder for me, right? So if I give you a ratio, for example, if I give you a ratio 7 is to 9, I know the same ratio will be 14 is to 18, right? That's because you're multiplying both sides by 2. So the factor you're multiplying on the both sides is exactly the same, right? So don't make your life harder, please, okay? I told you your initial approach of how to solve the question is important. So Sanmeet, what I said is if you have a initial ratio, if you add or subtract quantities on both sides of the ratio which are also in that same ratio, then the final ratio will also remain the same, right? So this is what you'll have to take back from a question. Very, very simple question. I wouldn't even rate this beyond the 600 level, but you see how intricate the traps are here, right? Okay with this, guys? All of you all? Okay, so I'm going to take this a notch higher, and this question I would definitely rate it in a good 650 660 case, right? So again, 2 minutes. Your 2 minutes start now. Okay, guys, you can start typing your answers in the chat window, please. Last call for answers, last 10 seconds. All right. So coming to this question, right? See, again, I wouldn't classify this question as a, really hard one, right? It's just that the traps here are very, 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 very nice and intricate, right? So majority of y'all have answered alpha. A good amount of y'all have answered Charlie. There are some outliers in terms of beta, delta, and some echoes, right? So let's break this question down. And this is what, you would take back from this question. Okay. And this is especially for people who've answered alpha. For people who answered Charlie, great attempt. The answer is Charlie. So x square y plus xy square is greater than xy plus xy square, right? So I can just simplify this entire equation, right? I can knock off xy square on both sides. I can knock off xy on both sides. So the question is just asking you, is x square y greater than 0? Now this is the big trap that normally people will fall for. How many of y'all assumed that x square is always going to be positive, so everything would hinge upon the sign of y, and you said alpha should be the answer and marked A and moved on? Most of y'all did that, right? But the take back, and this is again what is something should this point is something that should go into your error log of sorts. Remember, a square is never positive. Okay, this is not right. A square is non-negative. That means it can either be 0 or positive, right? So what most of y'all have overlooked directly is to say, is x square y greater than 0? That means only y should be greater than 0. You'll have assumed that x square is always going to be positive. You'll have forgotten the fact that x can also be equal to 0, right? So when I go to the first statement, y is greater than 0. Now this is where your data sufficiency procedure also comes in handy. Whenever you work with a statement, you never try to prove the statement to be sufficient. You always try to prove the statement to be insufficient. So when y is greater than 0, I know that x square y will always be greater than 0. That's always going to be a yes if y is greater than 0, if you ignore the value for x square. But you try to contradict this. You try to get, a condition where I can disprove the statement. So if I take the value of x is equal to 0 and y is greater than 0, I'm still satisfying the statement. But if I answer the main question, it's going to give me a definite no. So I get a yes and a no from the first statement. The first statement is insufficient. The three possible answer choices are B, C, and E. Now let's take the second statement. The second statement says xy is greater than 0. Now think about this, guys. All I know from this statement is both x and y are positive or both x and y are negative, right? So if y is negative, I know x square can be positive. So this entire product is going to give me negative. It gives me a no. But if y is positive, I can take x square also to be positive. It's going to give me a yes. So again, I get contradictions. I can cancel out B. But the advantage of the second statement is this. If they tell me that xy is greater than 0, then since I know x and y have to have the same sign, y can never be equal, x can never be equal to 0, right? X or y basically can never be equal to 0. So now when I put the two statements together, y is greater than 0 and x I know is not equal to 0 for sure. So now since x is not equal to 0, I can safely say that x square is always going to be positive. And from the first statement, I have y also to be positive. The product x square y will also be positive. So the answer here is Charlie. So the second point that should go into your error log of sorts should be that whenever you work with a square, don't assume the square always to be positive, right? A square is always non-negative. Don't forget to test for 0. Okay with this, guys? Yes, Pratyush, you can definitely cancel on both sides and compare, okay? Akriti, if you have a problem with the audio issue, I don't think anybody else is facing it. Just quickly log out and log in. Shweta, the second statement is pretty easy, right? The second statement tells you xy is greater than 0. Basically, this means that both x and y have to be positive or both x and y have to be negative. And remember, the question I need to answer is x square y greater than 0. So if I take the case where both x and y are positive, x square will also be positive. Y is also positive, so I'm going to get a yes to the main question. But if I take x to be negative and y to be negative, x square will always be positive, but y being negative will give me a no to the main question, right? So you can easily discard the second statement. But when you put the two statements together, I know that x can never be equal to 0, right? And if x can never be equal to 0, then I know for a fact that x square can always be taken to be positive for sure. Okay with this, guys? You see the simple trap that the GMAT would lay in terms of 0. You have to be a little careful about the 0 case. Yes, possible, Sarmeet. You can take xy common also, absolutely fine. But you can't cancel out the xy, okay? You can't cancel out the xy on both sides. Guys, you can't cancel out xy on both sides. You can take xy common, xy. If you take xy common, what you're going to get is y plus 1 plus x is greater than xy into 1 plus y. Now, what you cannot do is knock off the xy on both sides. You're going against the rule of inequalities. Remember, guys, you can only cancel variables on both sides of the inequality only when you know that variable is not equal to. Think about it, right? When can you cancel variables on both sides of an inequality? Only if you know the sign of that variable, right? Because basically by cancelling xy on both sides, you're dividing both sides by xy. How do you know the sign for xy? Do I know the sign for xy? I don't know that, right? So it can be either negative or positive. So I don't know whether I keep the inequality sign the same or flip it. So if you made that mistake, then there is obviously you've identified one more problem here is in your conceptual understanding of inequalities, right? So you need to brush up on the inequality concept. I didn't cancel it out because it was a product, Hambrick. I canceled it out because I took them to the left-hand side. It's a negative, it becomes negative, right? So I'm not canceling it out if it's a product. If it's a product, I cannot cancel. If it's a sum, I can always cancel. Let me give you a simple example, okay? Let me give you a simple example. If I give you a plus b is less than b, I can definitely say a is less than 0, for sure. I can just subtract b on both sides. That's the rule of inequalities. But if I say ab is less than b, I cannot cancel b on both sides and say a is less than 1. That's wrong because you don't know the sign of b. Okay? You can always add or subtract anything you want on both sides, but you cannot multiply or divide both sides with a variable, right? Unless you know the sign of that variable. Okay with this, guys? All of y'all? Sure? Any other doubts on this question? Yes, Teja, you can tell me what doubts. Okay, no doubts, fine. All right, so what is the point that you need to take back here? Always make sure you test for 0 always. Don't assume that all squares are positive, all right? Again, this wasn't a very tough problem, right? It's an easy one, just tricky. So you have to get these types of questions right, right? If you're looking at getting a 47, 48, 49. All right, okay. Now I'm making another point here. See, one point before you start the questions. Teja, you can at least expect 2 to 3 questions from inequalities. Okay, I mean, there's no specific number. It depends upon different test takers, but you can expect at least 1, 2, or 3 questions from inequalities. So one more big point that I've always noticed people making, right, is they don't read the question stem carefully, especially when you have really difficult word problems, right? What happens, they get so muddled up in the language that they're not able to translate things stage by stage. The key, remember, is to always spend more time on the question and translate things stage by stage. It's a very easy question. I've pulled this out from the, one of the prep tests. It's an official question, I want all of you all, I'm again going to give you only a minute and a half. It's not very difficult. Your minute and a half starts now. Okay, guys, you can start typing your answers in the chat window. It's an easy one, so I don't think many of you all should struggle on this. Okay, good. Most of you all have given me the right answer, and the answer is definitely C, right? The point I just wanted to make here is the solution to this question is so easy, but it's just that the wording of the question makes it a little problematic to comprehend, right? Whenever you encounter questions on word problems, always take a step back and read the statements carefully. And whenever you read the statements, right, always make sure you read the question in parts. Never read the entire question, then go back, then create the equation, and then work with it. Okay, it makes more sense for you to break down the question in parts. So let's work it stage by stage by stage. Before being simplified, the instructions for computing income tax in country R were to add 2% of one's annual income to the average of 100 units of country R's currency and 1% of one's annual income. So now if you got a little muddled up in that entire sentence, no problem, go through. Which of the following represents the simplified formula for computing the income tax in country R's currency for a person in that country whose annual income is I? So what they have done is now they have defined the variable for you, right? So I know the annual income is I. Now, the question says the instructions for computing income tax in country R were to add 2% of one's annual income. Stop there. So 2% of one's annual income would be 2 by 100 I. Add this to the average of 100 units of our country R's currency. That's 100 units of country R's currency and 1% of one's annual income. Remember, this average applies to these two quantities. the 100 units of country R's currency and 1% of one's annual income. So 1% of one annual income would be 100 plus I by 100. And the average of this would be divided by 2. So this is exactly what the question is asking me to find out. So breaking this down would be 2 by 100 I plus 50 plus I by 200, right? So I would just change the value here. I would just change it to 4I by 200 plus 50 plus I by 200. So adding these two terms gives me 5I by 200 plus 50. That gives me 50 plus I by 40. And that's your pick. The key was just to break down that entire second and the third line, right? If you break down the second and the third line, things becomes a little easier for you to get to an answer. Okay, Babita, you'll have to read things step by step by step by step, right? I can't help you with the the English aspect of things, especially to understand the meaning of words, but I can definitely tell you how you need to break things down. Okay, you just have to read things in parts, right? In country, if the for computing income tax in country R were to add 2% of one's annual income, so stop at that point, translate that. So 2I by 100. You're adding this to the average of 100 units of country R's currency and 1% of one's annual income. So obviously the average always has to apply between two quantities. The two quantities given to you are 100 units of country R's currency, that's 100, and 1% of one's annual income, which will be I by 100, right? And it's the average. So I need to add the two and divide by 2. And this is the equation that I exactly need. Okay. Remember, on these questions, guys, never a good approach to try numbers. Okay, because it'll just take you too long time to get to an answer, because you'll have to then work with each and every answer choice and get to an answer. It's easier for you to translate things stage by stage by stage. But you agree with me that the key here to solving such questions is to always read the question stem very, very carefully, right? So that's one important point that I'll always make a note of, right? And I've always made seen this, especially when I've analyzed the practice test with students. They always miss out on some key pieces of information that the question stem gives you. And once you miss out on the key piece of information, everything goes for a toss. All right? Perfect. So now I'm going into the higher realms of questions. Okay, I'm going to the slightly harder levels of questions. And I'm going to again pertain myself to most of the questions being data sufficiency, because that's where most of the errors occur, right? So I'm going to give you this question. I'm going to give all of you all 2 minutes to break this question down and give me an answer. It's a good, I would say, I would definitely rate this at a good 700 level question. So if you get this right, it's a good sign. So your time starts now. Ashwati, the last question would be what? Approximately 550, 500 level, I would say. Right? It's just a very, very easy one. Okay, you can start typing your answers in the chat window, please. Final call for answers, guys. Last 10 seconds. All right. Now, one big takeaway, right, that I had when I was preparing for my test was this, especially when I solved data sufficiency questions. I always learned to leverage the pieces of information given in the question stem. Learn to spend more time on the question stem. Many students don't do this. They directly jump into the statements and then try to backtrack from there. Believe me, guys, in most of the cases, if you spend time on the question stem, you get to an answer. All right. So let's work with this. If n is a positive integer, n is positive, what is the last digit of 1 factorial plus 2 factorial plus 3 factorial till n factorial? Right? Now, looking at this question, the first thing that you'll try to figure out is what exactly is this question testing me on? And what exactly is the catch in this question? For those of you all who know how a factorial proceeds, any factorial beyond 5, inclusive of 5, right, or greater than or equal to 5, will always have a units digit 0. Think about it, guys. Any factorial greater than or equal to 5 will always have a unit digit 0, because at the end of the day, when you split open that factorial, you're always going to get a 5 multiplied by 2, and 5 into 2 will always give you a 0 in the end. That's what this question is testing. That's the concept that the question tests you on. So now let's look at the different possibilities. I'm not even going into the statements for now, okay? I'm just looking at the question. If n was 1, then this would be 1 factorial, and I know here the units digit would be 1. If n was 2, then this would be 1 factorial plus 2 factorial. Remember, 1 factorial is 1, 2 factorial is 2, so 1 plus 2 would give me 3. If n is 3, it's 1 factorial plus 2 factorial plus 3 factorial. 1 factorial plus 2 factorial gives me a unit digit 3. 3 factorial will give me 6, right? 3 into 2, 6. 3 into, so I'm going to get this as 9. So n is equal to 4 is going to give me 1 factorial plus 2 factorial plus 3 factorial plus 4 factorial. Think about it, guys. Okay, this is going to give me 1. This is going to give me 2, right? The 3 factorial is going to give me a 6. And the 4 factorial is 4 into 3 into 2 into 1. So 4 3 is a 12, 12 2 is a 24. I'm going to get a 4. So 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 3, 6 is 9, 9 plus 4 again gives me a 3. And I know for a fact now, for any value that I take beyond 5 or beyond, I know that the unit digit now is always going to remain to be 3. Because 5 factorial would be 1 fact of n is equal to 5 would be 1 factorial plus 2 factorial plus 3 factorial plus 4 factorial, which all would add up to give me a unit digit 3. But 5 factorial would give me a unit digit 0. 6 factorial again would give me a unit digit 0. 7 factorial again would give me a unit digit 0. So I know for anything from 4 onwards till infinity, if I go, the unit digit will always be 0, right? So basically, I need to figure out whether it's possible for me to get one out of these 3 unit digits as the answer, because the question is a value data sufficiency. I need one unique answer. Now I'm going into the statements. The first statement says n is divisible by 4. So if n is divisible by 4, n can be 4, 8, and so on. I know for a fact If n is equal to 4, the unit digits is 3. If n is equal to 8 also, the unit digit is always going to remain 3. So the first statement is clearly sufficient, AD. Now let's go to the second statement. Now the second statement is one where you have to be a little careful. N square plus 1 divided by 5 is an odd integer. Now there are two ways you can look at this question. You can look at the statement by actually putting in values, or you can just analyze this. I know for a fact that n square plus 1 when I divide by 5 should give me an odd integer. Then I know n square plus 1 has to be odd, right? And if n square plus 1 has to be odd, n square I know also has to be, think about it guys, n square has to be even because I need n square plus 1 to be odd, right? Perfect. That's one way to look at it. And then you can put in odd values of n and then get to an answer, right? Or even values of n and then get to an answer. Or you can just randomly put in values which satisfy that statement. Now the first value I can put in here is n is equal to 2. Because 2 square plus 1 gives me 5. 5 by 5 is 1. That's definitely an odd integer. So n can be 2. And if I know n is 2, the unit digit is always going to be 3. I cannot put n is equal to 3 because n is 3 square is going to be 9. 9 plus 1 gives me 10. 10 by 5 does not give me an odd integer. The next value that I can put for n, and I can't put n as 4, I can't put n as 5, I can't put n as 6, I can't put n as 7, but I can also always put n to be equal to 8 because 8 square is 64. 64 plus 1 gives me a 65, and 65 plus divided by 5 gives me a 13. So I know the next value of n that satisfies this condition is n is equal to 8. And I know if n is equal to 8, again, the unit digit is always going to be 3. And any value I take for n, which is going to satisfy this statement, is always going to be beyond 8. And for whatever value for n I take, the unit digit is always going to remain 3. So the second statement is also sufficient. The answer is D. So whenever you work with data sufficiency questions, the higher levels, right? The best thing to do is to always spend more time on the question stem. If you spend more time on the question stem, things become very easy, right? So if you look at the second statement, right, for those who are a little confused with the second statement, there are two ways you can work it out. You can put in values which satisfies the statement, or you can analyze. What I did with the analysis was this. I know for n square plus 1 divided by 5 to give me an odd integer, n square plus 1 has to be odd. And for n square plus 1 to be odd, n has to be even, because even plus odd only can give me an odd. So I'm only going to think about plugging in even values for n. So the first even value I plugged in for n was n is equal to 2 because it clearly satisfies that statement. I can't put n is equal to 4 because it doesn't give me an integer itself. I can't put n is equal to 6 because again it doesn't give me an integer. Why does n square plus 1 should be odd? You just have to break this down, right, Sana? So n square plus 1 by 5 is odd, right? If you divide any number by 5 and you need to get an odd integer, this entire n square plus 1 has to be odd, no? Because 15 by 5 can only give me an odd, right? Or 25 by 5 can only give me an odd, isn't it? I can't have a 10 by 5 to give me an odd. So I'm just saying, for me to say this divided, n square plus 1 divided by 5 should give me an odd, n square plus 1 has to be odd. The numerator has to be odd. Statement 1, no, this divisible and perfectly divisible are exactly the same, Shaker. Okay, when I say 5 is divisible by 4, that means I'm saying 5 by 4 is an integer. Okay, Kiran, statement 1 is actually very easy to work with, right? Because what I'm doing in statement 1 is this. The statement 1 is just telling me n is divisible by 4, right? So if n is divisible by 4, the values of n can be 4, 8, 12, 16 and so on. So if the values of n is 4, 8, 12, 16 and so on, if n is equal to 4, then this entire unit digit will depend upon 1 factorial plus 2 factorial plus 3 factorial plus 4 factorial. That gives me a unit digit 3. So this gives me a unit digit 3. If I take n is equal to 8, I know n is equal to 8 will also give me a unit digit 3. If I take n is equal to 12, that will also give me a unit digit 3. Right? So I'm getting one definite answer throughout, right? So the first statement is clearly sufficient. Got this? So guys, on the higher levels of questions, right, especially on data sufficiency, learn to break down the question stem. Because if you break down the question stem, things become very, 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 very simple for you to work. See, n is a positive integer, Shushmita. You should read the question carefully, right? N is a positive integer, right? 0 is neither positive nor negative, no? You have to read the constraint, right? You can't forget the constraint in a question, right? So that's the first point that I made. You can't fall for such traps, isn't it? You have to read the question carefully. If I forget the fact that n is a positive integer, then definitely I can put n is 0, okay? Because 0 is definitely divisible by 4. But the question said n is a positive integer. Perfect. Okay with this, guys, all of you all? Jitesh, I didn't say the statement 2 is not sufficient. I said statement 2 is definitely sufficient because you're always getting a constant 3 throughout, right? So the statement 2 is definitely sufficient, right? If you take n square plus 1 by 5 to be an odd integer, the values which satisfy that equation are n is equal to 2, n is equal to 8, and so on. And if I take n is equal to 2, then the unit digit will always be 1 factorial plus 2 factorial, right? That's 3. N is equal to 8 will also give me 3. Yes, the answer is D. I marked D here, right? Perfect. So guys, I'm taking this now into slightly higher realms, right? I want to make my point again. This is a very, very, very important point that you'll have to, take back. Learn to leverage the pieces of information that the question stem gives you, because if you're able to do that, you're going to get to an answer very quickly. So here's your next question, which again tests you on the same thing and how you leverage the pieces of data that the question gives you. All right. If you're not able to leverage the pieces of data that the question gives you, then it's a problem to work this question. So again, I want all of you all to take a couple of minutes. Please do not type in the answers in the chat window until I ask you to do so. No, Samir, that's a assumption you're making, right? I mean, if I give you 1 plus 2 plus 3 till n, that does not mean n cannot be equal to 1, right? So when you're taking the sum to n natural numbers, you will do 1 plus 2 plus 3 till n. That does not mean that if I'm going to stop at, I'm not going to consider n to be 1. The sum of n natural numbers formula even applies if I take n as 1 and 2, right? You're making an assumption by saying that if it's 1 plus 2 plus 3 till x, that you only take values beyond 3. Okay? Guys, just a small clue out there, right? See, on geometry, right, the biggest trap is the trap of assumptions. Okay, so just make sure that you don't assume certain things, right, when you get to an answer. Yogiraj, again, it's very difficult for me to say how many questions you get from DS and PS from geometry. Okay, again, it varies for different test takers, but ideally, all topics will be tested in some capacity or the other. Okay, so it might be 2 for a person, might be 3 for another, and so on. I mean, you really can't say because it's different for different test takers. Yes, you all can type in your answers. Most of you are already doing so anyway. Uishi, I like the way how you ask me B question mark, right? So it's either B or a C, okay? No question mark after that. All right, guys. So let's have a discussion on this question, okay? I would say approximately 90% of you all have picked C. Some of you all have picked B. Some of you all have picked D. I haven't seen any A's and E's so far, right? All right. So let's have a discussion, right? Now, one thing you have to stay away from when you work with questions on geometry is you'll have to be aware of the assumption trap. Okay, you never assume things from how the diagram looks to you. And the second thing is geometry is where I've always found that they always keep hidden pieces of information in the question or in the figure itself. Okay, learn to leverage the data given. Now, before I jump into the question, I told you I have a very bad habit of breaking down the question stem. Okay, so in the figure to the right, if point C is the center of the circle, so they're mentioning that C is the center and you have a circle, and DB is 7. So since DB is passing through the center, I know the diameter is 7. So this is given to me as 7. What is the length of DE? So I know CB is also going to be 3.5, right? Because CB is going to be the radius and the radius is half the diameter. There's one rule that I always follow when I work with circles. Okay, I always identify the radii of circles. So I know for a fact that CD is the radius, AC is the radius, and BC is also the radius. So I know the triangle ABC from the figure itself is isosceles because AC and CB are equal, right? Because they are radii of that circle. And now the second thing that I do is I try to figure out, looking at the question stem itself and the diagram, obviously, what actually the question is actually asking me to find out. The question is asking me to find out the length of DE. But what I see, notice here is I have a triangle inside another triangle. And whenever I see any question where there's a triangle inside another triangle, I know in the back of my mind that that question is always testing me on the concept of similarity. So I'll have to think about similarity rules to get to an answer, right? So I've broken down my question. I found the radii. I found that hidden piece of information. I know how to proceed further because now if I'm able to prove similarity between these two figures, I can easily find out whether the length of DE if I have the length of AC. And remember, we have the length of AC also, which is 3.5. Now let's work with the first statement. The first statement here is X is 60 degrees. Now, if X is given to you as 60 degrees, then this triangle ABC is going to become an equilateral triangle, right? Because if this is 60 and these two sides are equal, it's an isosceles triangle like I told you before. If these two sides are equal, these two base angles also have to be equal. And if this angle X is 60, the other two angles also are going to be 60. So ABC becomes equilateral. So I know all sides here are going to be 3.5. But remember, is this enough information for me to answer what is the length of DE? Because for me to calculate the length of DE, I need to somehow prove that these two triangles are similar. And remember, for me to prove that two triangles are similar, I at least need two angles to be equal. And from this statement, I have absolutely no clue that the two angles are equal. You can't assume that AC and DE are parallel to each other, okay, just because they look parallel to you. So clearly the first statement is insufficient because it does not give me any information about DE. So out goes AD, I have BCE. Now the second statement is where you'll have to think a little carefully, okay? So I'm just going to erase what I've written on the diagram first, right? So let me erase this, and this, right? So I have this to be 3.52 and I have this to be equal to this. So now what they're telling me is DE is parallel to CA. As soon as I get information about lines being parallel, my mind would always go towards thinking of alternate angles and corresponding angles. So if DE and AC are parallel, the first thing I would do is find a transversal between these two parallel lines. And here DB, the diameter, is my clear transversal. So if this angle is X, this angle will also be X. And I know that B is going to be the common angle between the smaller triangle and the larger triangle. So if B is the common angle between the two, and you have the other angle here to be X and X, the third angle also has to be equal. So I know for a fact the second statement tells me triangle ABC is similar to triangle EDB. And if triangle ABC is similar to triangle EDB, I know I can write down the proportion between the sides. I already have a ready-made proportion between the sides because the length of DB here is 7 and the length of CB here is 3.5, right? So the proportion between the sides is 7 divided by 3.5, which is 2:1. So all the sides are going to be in the proportion 2:1. So since AC is also 3.5, DE is going to be 7. So the second statement is clearly sufficient to answer the question. Okay with this, guys, all of y'all? Which angle should be 90, Akanksha? I mean, I didn't get your question, right? The angle made from the center to the circumference is not 90. I think you should go back and review that rule. The diameter subtends 90 degrees at any point on the circumference of the circle, okay? Not the radius. The diameter subtends an angle of 90 degrees at any point on the circumference of the circle. Okay? All right. Guys, the diameter subtends 90 at the circumference, not the radius. Okay, I see 2-3 people have picked that as 90. Right? All of y'all? Okay with this? All of y'all? Perfect. This is a good high level question, okay? Because many people forget the fact that geometry is actually slightly tricky that way because it tests you on all multiple concepts. So here you're being tested on the concept of triangles with similarity, and you're being tested on circles also on how to identify the radii. All right. So learn to break down the question stem, right? You'll have to learn to, put 2 and 2 together in terms of the information that is given. So most of you all did not think about using similarity at all when you looked at the second statement. Right? You didn't figure out that two angles were equal. As soon as I said D is parallel to CA, you all should have thought, okay, I'm getting two parallel lines. I need to look for a transversal. Sanmeet, the rule is if two angles are equal, right, in a triangle, the triangles are similar, because if two angles are equal, the third angle by default is always equal, right? Can EA be obtuse? That would become a quadrilateral DEAB. DEAB. I mean, why would you change how the diagram looks? I mean, first of all, how can you assume that any line which has a slight tilt, to the left is obtuse. That's why I said, right, Karthik, you need to be a little careful in terms of making assumptions on geometry, right? Just because I draw a figure like this, right, I can't assume, that this angle is going to be obtuse. That can be anything. I told you, Ishi, you don't need to worry about the properties here, right? Think about how to get to your answer logically. You don't need to work with the midpoint property at all. Yes, you can definitely shift point E, right? You can shift point E to A if you want. You get that as 90, right? Angle B is common, right? But I don't have any other angle which is common, isn't it? See, when angle B is common to the triangles, only one angle is common. For me to prove similarity, I need two angles to be equal. From the first statement, I have only angle B to be common, because I can't say angle EDB is X and angle ACB is also X. They're not told me that the two lines are parallel. Got it, Jitesh? Angle B is common. If one angle is common, it does not make two triangles similar. No, the rule is, Ramesh, when two angles are equal, the third angle is also equal, right? It's logical, no? When I'm saying that if this is 60 degrees, this is 70 degrees, and you have another figure, this is 60, this is 70, then the third angle of the two triangles will always be equal, right? That's what I meant, right? When two angles are equal, you can always prove similarity, because if two angles are equal, the third angle will also be equal in two triangles, right? And the rule of similarity is, you either prove the sides to be in proportion, or you prove the angles to be equal, or you have another third one which is called side angle side. Okay, I'm not going into the concepts here. Anjan, very few formulae. Okay, I told you. See, many people, understand geometry as a set of formulae, right? It's not a set of formulae. It's how you break down the question and how you make your constructions, which is most important. Okay. Yes, EAB is also transversal as well, right? Yes, definitely. EAB is also transversal, so angle AED is equal to BAC. Nice, definitely, Vandana, you're absolutely right. Yes, Anjan, you definitely need to know what the volume of a cylinder is. But volume just has one formula, guys. Volume is area of base into height. You don't need to remember volumes for all other figures. Volume just has one formula, area of base into height. Yes, if the diameter is the base of the triangle, then it is a right angled one. Okay. The rule of see, it's more of a add-on to a rule of circles. Okay. In a circle, we say that a common chord or a common arc, whatever angle it subtends at the circumference, it will always subtend twice the angle at the center. Okay, for those of you who know that property, right? No. This is a high level question. Okay, it would be somewhere in the 600, 640, 650 level, right? So whatever angle is subtended at the circumference, you have twice the angle at the center, right? So the diameter is also a chord, right? So if the diameter is subtending 180 at the center, it has to subtend 90 at the circumference, right? The diameter subtends 90, not the radius. Okay with this, guys? Everything would be tested in some capacity or the other, Chetan. Okay, all topics will be tested. The only thing that I've seen very few questions on DS is three-dimensional geometry. Okay, that's the only thing that I don't think, and obviously permutations, because with permutations and three-dimensional geometry, it's very hard for me to draft a question because there's lots of pieces of information that run in that question. Okay, everything else other than that, you definitely have DS questions. Perfect. So guys, one more question, and this would be a good one. It would actually put together whatever we discussed from the beginning of the webinar to now. So what you'll have to do is, remember guys, what we discussed before you start the question, listen to me. We discussed in the first that you'll have to be very careful reading the question. So make sure you read the question carefully. Spend more time on the question stem. Understand what you need to do with the question. Wherever you have a possibility to break down the question, please break down the question. Third, make sure when you're working for a data sufficiency, you always try to disprove the statement. Always try to get a contradiction. Never try to directly say the statement is sufficient. Always try to contradict whatever answer you get. And remember, on the harder levels of questions, and this is the point that I'm adding now, your logical analysis of questions will be more important than the actual math involved. Okay, you'll have some math involved, but you'll have to logically figure out what to do with that math. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes for this question again. Your 2 minutes start now. Okay, guys, you can start typing your answer in the chat window, please. All right, let's have a discussion on this. Yes, Shikhar. So you've come to the point there, but there are certain things that you overlooked, right? So guys, what happens in the harder levels of questions, right? You'll have just too many pieces of information that you'll have to juggle with. So you have to be a little more structured in how you collate all those information together. Okay. So what the question tells me is AB into CD is 1995. Now, as soon as you see something, two numbers multiplied to each other as 1995, you remember you can always break down 1995. So the question says in the correctly worded multiplication problem above, each symbol represents a different non-zero digit. So I'm going to read the question carefully. Each symbol represents a different non-zero digit. What is the value of C? So I'm going to spend more time on the question stem. I'm going to break down 1995. So 5 3s are 15, 5 9s are 45, 5 9s are 45, 3 1s are 3, 3 3s are 9, 3 3s are 9, 7 1s are 7. I can divide 133 by 7. So 7 1s are 7, 7 9s are 63, 19 1s are 19. So basically I can write 1995 as 5 into 3 into 7 into 19. And remember, I need to work with these primes and see what combination of values can I take to give me two-digit numbers, which when multiplied to each other gives me 1995. So I clearly can't take 5 into 3, 15, and 7 into 19, because 7 into 19 is 133. That gives me a three-digit number. So I can take 5 into 7, which is 35. And 3 into 19, which is 57. So for those of you all who identified the 35 and 57, what you overlooked and you considered this, what you overlooked was this important piece of information. Each symbol represents a different non-zero digit. So clearly here B and C are the same, right? So I cannot consider 35 and 57 or 57 and 35. So I have to look at another combination. So the other combinations would be 7 into 3, which is 21, and 9 into 5, which is 5 into 19, which is 95. So I have 95 and 21. And remember, the reverse also here is going to be true. You can also have 21 and 95. And this falls into the constraints that I have, right? Each symbol represents a different non-zero digit. So I know now for a fact that AB, CD can be 95 and 21 or 21 and 95, because both when multiplied to each other would give me 1995. Now I'm going to work with the statements. And remember, the question is asking me what is the value of C. So the first statement says D is prime. So these are the two possibilities. And when the first statement says D is prime, I have to respect that piece of information. So if D is prime, I cannot consider 95 into 21 here, because D is 1, and 1 is definitely not a prime number. So the only logical pick here that I can choose is 21 into 95. And if AB into CD is 21 to 95, that gives me C to be 9. So the first statement is sufficient. Now coming to the second statement. The second statement says B is not prime. Now if B is not prime, I know AB into CD is 95 into 21 or 21 to 95. B is not prime. That means I cannot consider AB into CD as 95 into 21. The only thing I can consider here is 21 into 95. So if the value of AB into CD is 21 to 95, C again would be 9. So the answer here is delta. Right? So guys, the take back again, you need to leverage the pieces of information that the question stem gives you. Okay, you can't overlook key pieces of information that says that each symbol represents a different non-zero digit, right? Okay with this, guys? All of you all? So the take back here is you need to learn to break down the question, right? And then work with the question and then work with the statements towards the end. Okay with this? Perfect. So coming to the last question for the day, I think we're almost running short of time. So this would be the last question. Actually, skip this. Let's work with this. So this question, I've chosen this question because this question normally, after students take up a practice test, they ideally get this question wrong. Okay. So there's a point that I want to make with this question. This would be a good hard level on the GMAT. Okay, I would definitely rate this at a good 740, 750 level. And so I'm going to give all of you all a good 2.5 minutes to solve this. Your time starts now. Okay, guys, I've got a good amount of answers here. You can start typing your answers in the chat window, please. Shikhar, I don't worry. When I discuss this, you'll realize that I'm not going to use any values here. Okay. Karthik, you don't need to plug in values. Okay, it's going to be very hard for you to plug in values because you have to plug in integers as well as fractions. So, not a good approach to plug in values at all. Now, there's a reason why this is considered to be a hard question. Okay, is because most of the students get stuck up on this and then they resort to plugging in values. So, I mean, you're basically not leveraging the pieces of information, right? Yes, Karthik, what he said is right, but I'll show you how you don't need to think about using fractions to get to an answer, right? You're not leveraging the pieces of information that the question provides, right? Coming to your questions, let me have a look at it. Non-engineering background, math kind of rusty. Okay. Savik, I'll respond to your doubt once we're done with this question. Okay. Now, could be basically means it can be true sometimes for some values, need not be true sometimes for other values, right? Yes. Now the key here, guys, and most of y'all, only maybe I think a handful of y'all have given me the right answer to this question. The key here is this. This is the key to solving the entire question. On an inequality question, right? Normally when you have inequalities, x by y greater than 1, I think somebody touched upon that also previously when they say xy is greater than xy plus or xy into z plus 1, some of you all cancel the xy on both sides, right? This is completely wrong. That's completely wrong because you can't multiply or divide both sides of the variable until you know the sign of that variable. But if you're given that sign of that variable, right, you can definitely manipulate the inequalities the way you want. So I am not going to sit and plug in values like most of you all did. I'm going to try to manipulate what information the statements provide. So the first statement says x square is less than 2x is less than 1 by x. The key here is x is positive. So what I'm going to do is, without putting in values, I'm going to try to break down this inequality that's given to me. And remember, guys, the inequality is given to me here is a range of values. So what it's basically saying is x square is less than 2x and 2x is less than 1 by x. It's basically two inequalities put together. So I'm going to split it up and I'm going to work with it separately and see what values are going to satisfy this inequality. So since x is positive, I can knock off x on both sides here. So I know x is less than 2. And since x is positive, I can write this as 2x square is less than 1. So x square has to be less than half. And for those who know how to break down x square less than half, if x square is less than half, x will always be between minus 1 by root 2 and plus 1 by root 2. I cannot consider the minus 1 by root 2 aspect because clearly the question stem tells me x is positive. So I know for me to satisfy this entire statement, I have two possibilities. Either x has to be less than 2 or x has to be less than 1 by root 2. But clearly, x less than 1 by root 2 is the one which satisfies both the first half of the inequality and the second half of the inequality. So I know x is less than 1 by root 2. Any value that I take for x which is less than 1 by root 2 is going to satisfy this first inequality. So the first one always holds good. Most of you all gave me A as the answer because it is very easy for you to put in a fraction or put in an integer to get an answer for the first, right? But most of you all did not get the second is because it's very difficult for you to think of values. So I'm going to give you two pieces of take back. Okay, the first take back I've already given you. Whenever you have an inequality question where a variable is positive, you can always manipulate the entire question with a variable. So I'm going to continue to do that with the second statement. And also for those who plugged in values, I'll give you like a framework of plugging in. I saw some people mentioning what I normally mention in class about zone F. So I'll tell you how zone F will help you here. So x square less than 1 by x less than 2x. I'm going to split that up again. X square less than 1 by x, 1 by x less than 2x. So this gives me x cube is less than 1. And if x cube is less than 1, x is less than 1. And this gives me 1 is less than 2x square. So that's 2x square is greater than 1. X square is greater than half. So if x square is greater than half, x will be greater than 1 by root 2 or x will be less than minus 1 by root 2. I'm not going to consider the negative because x is always positive. So x has to be greater than 1 by root 2. So for me to satisfy the statement, I need a value which is less than 1 but greater than 1 by root 2. So any value of x in between 1 by root 2 and 1 will satisfy the second statement. The second also could be true. But let's go to the last. 2x is less than x square, less than 1 by x. I'm going to split this up. 2x less than x square, cancel out the x, gives me x greater than 2. And x square is less than 1 by x, basically cancel out, take the x and multiply it with the x square. I'm going to get x cube is less than 1. So if x cube is less than 1, x has to be less than 1. So what the third statement is giving me is, it's giving me contradictory values of x, because now it's telling the first part of the inequality is telling me the only values of x that satisfy the first part is x greater than 2. And the only values that satisfy the second part is x less than 1. There are no common values between the two which satisfies the entire inequality. So I know the third will never hold good. So the answer here is 1 and 2. So the first take back is, whenever you have a variable as positive, you can always work with that variable when you deal with an inequality, right? If not, then you'll have to resort, if this doesn't strike you, then you'll have to resort to plugging in values. And this is how you plug in values, guys. Remember, for those who attended my sessions, I've spoken about this acronym called ZONEF, right? Z stands for 0, O stands for 1, N stands for negatives, E stands for extremes, and F stands for fractions. So clearly when they're telling me X is positive, I don't need to test for 0, I don't need to test for negative. So what I'm going to do is test for 1, because I can't test for 1 here. 1, if I test for 1, I'm going to get 1 is less than 2 is less than 1. So it doesn't make sense for me to use 1. So the only two options that I'm left to test for is extreme values and fractions, right? And also positive integers, keep that in mind. So in this case, right, in the second statement, whenever you're working with fractions, it's always better, whether you're working with integers or fractions, and you realize that you can use all sorts of integers and all sorts of fractions, but it's more pertaining to fractions. When you're putting in a value of a fraction, always try to put values in extremes. So check for a value of 0.1 and also check for a value of 0.9, because x can also be between 0 and 1. Always learn to check for extremes, because 1 will not satisfy that, right? If x is 1, you're going to get x square is 1, 2x is 2, and 1 by x is 1, right? You can't have 1 to be less than 1, Preeta. It's not possible, right? You're going to get 1 is less than 1 in all of those threes, right? So I cannot just plug in 1 there, because it doesn't satisfy that inequality itself. So I'm going to think of putting in integers. I'm also going to think of putting in fractions. And when you're putting in values for integers and fractions, guys, always make sure, especially for fractions, to try for values of fractions in the extreme regions, okay? So check for 0.1, 0.9. I think somebody mentioned, I think Karthik mentioned that it would work for 0.8. So you can definitely put in the value of 0.8 and you'll realize that the second statement would hold good. What I have done is I've actually found the range of x which actually satisfies that inequality. So for the second, I'm saying that if you take any value in between 1 by root 2 and 1, that is going to satisfy the second statement. Yes, it's not a must be, Manikanta. It's a could be, right? So you try to prove that to be true. For a must be question, right, you always have to try to disprove. Yeah, if x is not positive, then you'll have to check for all possible values, right? If x is not positive, then everything I have to check for, right? It'll become a big problem. It's not a question that you can solve in a time frame of say 2.5 to 3 minutes. Definitely, yes. I'm not going to get into drawing a graph here. You can always represent any inequality, any linear equation on the coordinate plane. I'm not getting into that explanation at this point of time. If it's a must be, then none would hold good, right? Because must be means I need it to hold good in all cases, right? A must be true, if I'm saying, right, which of the following must be the correct ordering, then I know that none of them would be true, because it can be true only for some cases, need not be true for the others. A must be means I need a definite, the order should always be definite for all values of x. Avinash, it's not very easy for you to draw the graphs for all three, right? For example, you're lucky your x is positive, so you're always going to work with the first quadrant and the fourth quadrant, right? So you can work with it. So you can split it up into x square less than 2x and 2x is less than 1 by x and work with that. ZoneF is just a methodology to how you plug in values, Savik, right? So I normally speak about this in class on data sufficiency day 1. So I just say that when you're putting in values, just have a structure in your approach of putting in values. You always test for 0 first, then 1, then negatives, then extremes, then fractions. The recording will be sent to you, Preeta, so you don't need to worry. Okay. No, it will be uploaded. It will be uploaded on YouTube, right? So even if you don't get it over email, you can always look at the recording of this on our YouTube channel. Okay, guys. So that's my last question for the day. I picked this question because I've seen a lot of students asking me, or a lot of students getting this question wrong. Okay, the reason why you get this question wrong is because most of you all pick alpha as the answer. You all don't check for extreme values on fractions on answer choice 2. But I'm just saying that the alternate approach for those who know your stuff with inequalities, right, is to always work with the variable if it's given to you as positive. Okay, but this guys, so I have exactly 5 minutes to give you for any last questions, right, before it's a wrap from my end. Guys, any last questions that you would want to ask me? And any question it's an open forum of questions, so you can ask me anything that you want. Hambrick, what do you mean by free round of counseling? Can you just elaborate on that? You're saying it's a profile evaluation of sorts. Then if it's a profile evaluation, then we definitely do. Okay. This I would definitely rate Muzammil. This question I would definitely rate a good 740. Okay, 750. It's a touch and go situation, Jaya, with a 680. Okay, for ISB. Ideally, you would want to be on the safe side, on the other side of 700. But it's a touch and go situation. But we definitely had cases of students who got in with a 670 or a 680. Okay, even in round 2. So round 1, I think it's a pretty decent. It's a touch and go call. Okay, you'll have to take a call on that, right? I'm assuming if you got a 680, you've accepted that score, right? I wouldn't reject that score for sure. Guys, last questions. Samir, the rule of thumb that I always follow is whatever score you get on the Manhattan test, right? 43, 44 would actually be around a 47. You add 3 points to your Manhattan score, and that's exactly what your GMAT prep score will be. Okay? So anything in the range of 45, 46 on the Manhattan GMAT that you get, it would definitely transform to a 49 on the GMAT preps. Okay, I think somebody's given me a question. All right. The average score simple for ISB would be around a 705, 710, I'm guessing, right? Preeta, R2, yeah, I would say R1 would be greater than R2, right? R1 would be more important than R2. One, because the scholarships that you get, you have more chance of a scholarship there, right? And second, think about it like this, right? It's a fresh intake, so obviously, there's no criteria attached to how many people they take in and how many they don't, right? In round 1. On round 2 would be a problem because again, they try to maintain a diverse set of people in the batch, right? So they may restrict people from a common engineering background and only take somebody else, just to keep a diverse set of people. So it's easier for you to apply in round 1 always than in round 2. Shikhar, let me go through the question once again, please. I didn't read it entirely. So at a certain school, at 200 students, all children must take at least one of the 3 language classes: German, French, and Spanish. If 100 students take German, and none of the students who take French also take Spanish. Okay, then how many students does exactly 2, 3? Okay. So none of the students who take French also take Spanish basically means I have people who can take only French, or people who take only French and what is the third language? German. None of the students, the statement says none of the students who take French. So the entire French, basically it's the intersection between French and Spanish is 0. Okay. None of the students who take French also take Spanish, in mathematical terms. No, I'm thinking it's more of a Venn diagram, right? None of the students who take French also take Spanish. So basically means that the intersection between French and Spanish should be 0. Right? So the French entire circle can only include people who speak only French or French and German but not Spanish. Akriti, I already gave a source for the 700 to 800 level question. Okay, so the catch here is, again, I would only touch those resources if you're at a 48 or a 49 on quant. Okay, you can definitely make use of the advanced GMAT quant from Aditya GMAT, and you know, you can also use GMAT Club, which is a very good resource for harder questions. Okay. No, Yogiraj, the official guide would not be sufficient if you're looking to score anything beyond a 48 on quant. Okay. IR is definitely not included. It's a separately scored section. How to improve on IR? See, that's okay. So that's two things that I can say here. Okay, and many students, I don't know why, but lots of students are, you know, looking at IR as a very daunting section, but actually that's a very easy section to work with. It's just testing you on what concepts you studied in CR, RC, and quant. You just have to get familiar with the you know, the graphical representations and the data, how to work with the data, right? So what I would suggest, right? What I would suggest for you is to, you know, spend at least, you know, before your test date, spend at least a couple of weeks getting accustomed to what bubble charts are, getting accustomed to what scatter plots are, getting accustomed to solving graphs with one x-axis, two y-axis, getting accustomed to you know, analyze data, right? Huge pieces of data. There are two resources that you can use. One, when you're taking a practice test, never skip the IR section, because the IR questions will definitely help you out. Two, you can use an IR prep tool, which is available on the MBA.com website, but it's a paid prep tool that you'll have to make use of. So it's a pretty good resource on that. Okay. And three, I would say we normally provide you an IR video with the AWA, also you know, AWA video on that, and we also give you a Dropbox link of some AWA and IR resources. Okay, the IR resources Dropbox link would have approximately 50 IR questions of the 4 different types. So my advice is for you to use those questions for practice. Strategy for the last 30 days for a 48 scorer. Not much, Sanmeet. One, if you're at a 48, I told you in the beginning itself, identify what areas you're weak on. Focus on those areas. If you're good at ratio proportion, I wouldn't choose questions in ratio proportions to practice. So figure out what the weak areas are, focus on that, try to get most of those questions right. Second, strategize on the timing aspect. Right? If you realize that you're losing a couple of points because of time, just make sure you strategize on the timing aspect. Right? Try to, you know, create a strategy of how exactly you proceed with the question. So normally, and this is for everybody here, normally what we suggest, right? Normally what we suggest to every student as a timing strategy is this. Since you have 62 minutes on the quant section, right? For those of you all who are facing problems with time, I would recommend that you break down this 62 minutes into three sections of 15 minutes and one section of 17 minutes. And your target, since you have a total of 31 questions, your target should be 7 questions in the first 15, right? 8 questions in the second, 8 on the third, and 8 on the last section. Okay, 7 questions in the first 15, 8 on the second, 8 on the third, and 8 on the last. So if you find yourself that you're on the 6th question, right, and the 15-minute clock, the clock is ticked down from say 62 to 47, then my advice would be guess on the 7th and move on, so that you're not left out of the scenario of marking questions towards the end in a continuous string of errors. Okay, so just be a little careful there. Just be a little strategic also in terms of how you phase out your test, and most important, don't always try to avoid making continuous string of errors. See, for the people who are saying, what mock tests you use, there's only one set of mock tests you always use, and that would be the official GMAT preps. Okay. If you're getting a 47 simple on GMAT Club, I think that's a very, very good score. I think you should end up with a 49 on the GMAT preps. Okay. So you don't need to worry there. For applications, Rohan, ideally the rule of thumb is to keep a month for applications, right? 3 weeks to a month is what the rule of thumb is. Ashima, if you're making less than 5-6 errors in 31 questions and you're still not getting a 46, that is a very weird scenario. I mean, have you taken the official mocks, or are you using some other mocks? Akanksha, there are 6 official mocks, right? So you can take all the 6 official mocks, right? There are 2 free ones and 4 paid ones. So those are as close to the GMAT that you can get. No, Ashima, you're saying you got less than 5 or 6 errors in the entire test, right? And still you got a 46. I would want to know more information. What test was this? Was the 5-6 errors towards the end, and because you weren't able to mark those 5-6 questions in the end, because I don't think on the official mock test that if you get less than 5 or 6 errors, you will get a 46, unless the 5 and 6 errors are continuous string of errors towards the end where you've not finished the test itself. Yes, Shika, the 404 pack is pretty decent. You can make use of it if you've exhausted the official material. Two errors in the initial 10 and 2 more strewn here and there will not give you a 46, Ashima. So I don't think, I mean, if you can send me a screenshot of how your test went, then it will be better. Yes, so that's what I was suggesting, right? If you have 3 towards the end, were they actual mistakes, or were those questions that you missed to mark? Did you just let it go in a sense that you didn't mark anything as the answer choice, or did you actually pick them? And did you just mark something random towards the end? So 2 things here. So if you got around 5 to 6 errors, obviously I told you continuous strings of errors are a big downer, right? I don't think it's because of the 2 questions that you got wrong in the beginning, right? I think it's more to do about the 3 questions that you marked wrong in the end, right? So that causes a slight drop. Right? So ideally you should end up getting, with 5 or 6 to 7 errors, you should end up getting, and that if it's continuous errors, you should end up getting in the range of 47, I would say, right? All right, guys. Okay. All right, guys. So I'm wrapping up now. I'll see you, I think, in a couple of weeks' time. So we have a webinar, I think, on Quant every 2 weeks. So I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks' time. Good night. Take care. See you next time.